Member for Caroni Central.
Some a role was announced for the University of the West Indies in this matter. Can you clarify what that role might be, or do you know at this point?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, as I said before, this approach is dealing with a number of issues, and I was very clear in this House as to outline what it was. It started with a requirement for the government of Trinidad and Tobago to discharge its responsibility to the University of the West Indies, where there was a claim of over $200 million owing to the university. The university was in the position where, had those monies not been paid and paid promptly, that the university accounts would have been in danger of being qualified. The government of Trinidad and Tobago, requiring to discharge that responsibility in our current financial situation, agreed to use the asset-based arrangement, using an asset that we had in hand to discharge that payment. And therefore, the University of the West Indies accepted that it be paid by an involvement of this asset, an asset transfer. Having agreed to do that, we went further to set up the arrangement I just mentioned, where the University of the West Indies and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, through the Ministry of Health, will operate a hospital for profit, providing additional training and services to the local and the international community. And that is what is being worked out, and that's why it's being delayed a little bit like that. So, Madam Speaker, that is as far as I can go now. We do not have the final arrangements because that is being worked out. And as soon as those final arrangements are available, Madam Speaker, as the government always does, it will make it available to the population.
Central. Question number 4.
Yes, Prime Minister. Could the Prime Minister inform the House whether the relationship with any of the existing rating agencies has been severed by the government of Trinidad and Tobago?
Prime Minister.
Madam Speaker, I don't know where that question is coming from, but I will say, Madam Speaker, that the government currently has contractual arrangements known to all and sundry with 4 credit rating agencies. 1, Moody's Investors Services. 2, Standard & Poor's Global Ratings. 3, Fitch Ratings. And 4, CARICRIS, the Caribbean Rating Agencies. And if there's any question to be asked, Madam Speaker, about this issue of credit rating, the question really should be whether the government has added another credit agency, rating agency, because that's what we've done. Rather than sever any agency, we've added an extra one. So Fitch is now overlooking our rating considerations.
I recognize Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I listened to the Minister of Health, and I listened to the Minister of Finance before him. And I think the whole evening has been very interesting following the intervention of the member for Oropouche. What the Minister of Finance said, what the Minister of Health said did not, perhaps may have clarified a few things from his perspective, but I don't think the whole story has been told. If the position, as articulated by the member for Oropouche East, is as he has presented it. So I think that this matter perhaps will not die here today. But I do want to begin with the Minister of Finance. The one thing I would say about him is that You know, when he is onto something, he is like a dog with a bone. And he persists, he holds on to that bone. And he doesn't let that bone go, he keeps it going. And the second thing is that if there is misinformation meant to mislead or confuse, he will keep repeating that, as he did here today. And I want to start by dealing with this matter of the central bank overdraft, because I think when you look at the documents here, it is clear there is no additional expenditure. There is no increase in expenditure. It is, in fact, purely a variation. And what has happened in here is that a number of ministries have had their expenditure suppressed. And I don't think that these things were internal to the ministries. I think that they were external from the Minister of Finance, asking them, these ministries, to provide funds to meet the requirements of the overdraft account. And in this way, we have this variation bill today, finding $517 million to pay the interest on the overdraft. And I want to start by going to the Auditor General's report of 30th April 2018, which would have covered the 2017 year. And I simply read that because it's the latest one, because 2018 will not come out until maybe April of 2019. And I just want to read here on page 4 of the document on the Exchequer account, which at the end of 2017 stood at $36,534,046,618.86. And the Auditor General writes here, the Exchequer account is the bank account for the consolidated fund. The account was overdrawn by $36,534,046,618.86, an increase of $6.9 billion or 23.5% when compared with the previous year's balance of $29,583,071,135.81. This account has been consistently in overdraft since 2003. And I simply read it. I can read the rest, but it is not necessary. I simply read it to emphasize the fact that far from the impression which the Minister of Finance sought to convey, that overdraft balances in this country began during the years of the People's Partnership, the Auditor General's report would make it very clear that it goes back until 2003, and it has been a consistent practice since. You see, and as you know, the chairmanship of the Public Accounts Committee stands to the opposition in the Parliament. And through the leader of the opposition, I have the responsibility and duty, I would say, to the country to chair that committee. And because the matter of the overdraft account was such a big political issue, pushed by the Minister of Finance and to some extent the Prime Minister as well, and other ministers here during the 2016-2017 period, when the occasion presented itself and the Auditor General's reports were coming in, through the secretary to the committee, we wrote to the central bank and asked the governor some fundamental questions to try to clarify some issues about the overdraft at that time. At that time, the overdraft was about $9 billion, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And we wrote to the governor of the central bank, and he wrote back to us. The secretary wrote to him, and the governor of the central bank replied. And I read here from page 2 of his letter. He says, the bank, that is the central bank, may make temporary advances to the government on such terms and conditions as may be agreed upon between the bank and the minister. So it's a discussion between the Minister of Finance and the central bank governor. 2, the total amount of outstanding advances made under this section shall not at any time exceed 15% of that portion of the estimates of annual revenue of the government, which comprises the sum of total recurrent revenues and capital receipts, exclusive of local and external loans for the financial year in which the advances were initially made. So what he's saying is that the way you calculate how much overdraft you can get is by calculating 15% of the, basically the anticipated revenue as put forward in the budget. And then he goes on, item 3, all advances granted under this section shall be repaid as soon as possible, and in the event that any advances made in an earlier financial year remain outstanding in the current financial year, the power of the bank to make further advances to the government under this section shall be limited to the amount by which the total amount authorized in the year of the earliest outstanding advance exceeds the unpaid balance thereof. So what he means is that whether it is for 1 year or consolidated for more than 1 year, it must not exceed the 15% of the revenue estimate for the current year, the year in question. Okay? So this is quoted from section 46 of the Central Bank Act, which you can find on the website. But the governor of the central bank went through the trouble for clarity of putting it down on paper for us. And about that $9 billion overdraft that had been the subject of political accusations by the members on the other side, and that was so highly politicized as something that was an affront to good governance in the country, and something that was meant to make us look as if we squandered and wasted the money for the country. We asked the central bank governor, how is the net overdraft computed, okay? And he wrote it to us. I won't read it here. It's 3 or 4 lines. It's not necessary for a discussion. And he said, then we asked him, does this number give the central bank the option of allowing government to draw further on the exchequer account? And his response was yes, subject to the 15% cap under section 46 of the CBA, which I just read, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And the final question we asked him was the government in breach of any statutory or legislative requirement? And he said, the response, the government has not been in breach of the provisions of section 46 of the CBA as detailed above. So the summary, and then he gives the details of all the overdraft from, I think he used the figure because we had asked him for a decade. So he gave us from 2006 to 2016. So the end result of that was that whatever that $9 billion represented in overdraft and whatever it was used for, and it was used, of course, to pay back pay to public servants. It was used as well for the recurrent expenditure that we might have been involved, that we might have needed, because I want to make the point that the drop in oil and then natural gas prices did not begin in 2015 or 16. It started to drop from June, July 2014. It continued. And then we had a dramatic drop in 2015 January. So much so that the then Prime Minister at the time, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, asked the Minister of Finance to impose a $4.5 billion cut on the entire budget, which was an election year, 2015. And when you look at the 2017 Auditor General's report, you will see that although the budgeted figure for 2015 was $62 billion, the actual expenditure was $59 billion, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Okay? So this is the sum total of this, and the central bank governor is saying this was in order, it conformed with Section 46 of the Central Bank Act, and it was within the law. That is to say, nothing was done that was extraordinary. And as I said before, the Auditor General's report of 2018, and it would say that in Auditor General's report before that the overdraft for the Exchequer account began in 2003. It was nothing new in 2014 or 2015. No. And so in that thing, I am not afraid of anything, but I'm not taking any disturbance at that. All right? I am not, I'm not taking any disturbance.
Members, member for Laventille
Anyway.
West, there's a procedure of how we operate in this chamber. There's a procedure how we operate in this chamber. No, it's okay, it's okay.
All
And
right.
also, Caroni Central,
I said no.
and Caroni Central, please address the chair.
Yes, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I'm speaking to you. See, I'm facing you, and I'm talking to you, and I'm trying to use my documents
Laventille
to
West,
convey
please.
the facts.
Please.
Now, the reason why I'm doing all of this is because, you see, I have the verbatim notes of the meeting that we had here on Monday. And when I look at the verbatim notes, and the Minister of Finance referred to it, but he didn't. He referred to it en passant, and he referred to it to convey a certain impression, sort of like we were asking questions that were not really important. All the information was in the public domain, and we were just being a nuisance. But in any case, he will give us the information today. So when this matter came up, I asked him, I'm reading from here now, Dr. Tewarie, yes, well, what was the extent of the central bank overdraft? So immediately he got me, you see, and he said he focused only on 2018. So I asked him, in fiscal 18, what was the, on which this interest was paid, okay? And he said it would have varied from day to day, so I will provide that information to you in writing. I want to indicate, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that I did not get it in writing, and I did not get it today. And in his initial presentation, and I'm sure he's going to come back to present at the end, maybe I will get it then, I did not get the number from him in his presentation too. Now, the chairman at the time, Madam Speaker, advised me to limit my questions to 2018. So I asked, can you tell me, Minister of Finance, what was the ceiling of the central bank overdraft in 2018? Mr. Imbert, Madam Chairman, the overdraft ceiling is in the public domain. We do not answer questions that are in the public domain. It is in the law. You debated that. Go check the law. Okay. So we leave that. Other members asked. Then other members raised. Dr. Gopi Singh and the member for Tabakit, sorry, the member for Caroni East and the member for Tabakit raised the issue of the interest rates. That wasn't answered either, but the minister had a press conference and he in fact provided the information. And again, he provided this for us today and told us that it's the repo rate, which is 5%. Okay? So the interest rate question was answered. And there is another part here that I will read later, but I'm raising those issues. The interest rate and the quantum of the overdraft for a particular reason, because it has not been answered, and it is not in the public domain as far as I'm concerned. The overdraft limit was raised from 15% to 20%. That is a fact. We debated it in here, and it became the law of Trinidad and Tobago. So any ceiling now would be 20%, it seems to me, of what would be the budgeted revenue for that year. Okay? So since I do not have the numbers, and thank you. Since I do not have the numbers, I want to use some numbers here simply to ask the Minister of Finance a question, for which I hope the answer would be very clear. And there's only two questions. How much is the overdraft? Not the percentage. How much in money, Trinidad and Tobago dollars or US dollars, if he prefers, is the overdraft, right? And because when I take $917 million at 5%, and I calculate it, it is a pretty staggering number. You see? And I do not think that the overdraft is that number. I don't want to call the number here because I don't want to be involved in what you might call alarmist old talk. All right? I'm raising the issue as a question. If we have $917 million as the interest, and it's 5%, when you calculate that, Mr. Deputy Speaker, we end up here with a staggering number. And I want to ask the member for Diego Martin Northeast and Minister of Finance whether I would be correct if I multiply that number. Now, the other thing is that if I use that staggering number of what that overdraft would be, and then base what the limit could be to be around that number or higher than that number, I would have to have a projected revenue that was pretty high, way above what the budgeted revenue would be for any year. Because the budgeted revenue for 2016 was $47.4 billion. And the budgeted revenue for 17-18 was $45.74 billion. And for 19, let's just say 18-19, it was $47.724 billion. So when I see this number, which is almost twice that if I use arithmetical calculation, I have to ask him to tell me what the facts are so I cannot be misguided. And I certainly am not going to use the numbers publicly out of a sense of responsibility and public duty, because I want him to tell me what the number is. But these things can be calculated. And the budgeted statement, since we are dealing with 2018 accounts, the total revenue has been budgeted at $0.74 billion. So it's very hard for me to reconcile, is what I'm saying, Mr. Deputy Speaker. An interest payment of $917 million at 5% with a projected revenue for 2018 of 45.74. So all I am asking is if the minister would give me what the number is. And if he would give me the number, I want him to tell me what is the budgeted revenue number on which it has been calculated, for what year, it was and whether it involves the overdraft account for 2018 alone, or whether the 2018 overdraft account involves an accumulated borrowing beyond 1 year. It is not a problem if that is the issue, because there's no law against that. It has been done before. I simply want to know what the facts are. Okay? All right. Now, this is a government that likes numbers, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The Minister of Finance likes numbers. He likes numbers too bad. For him, numbers have power. The Prime Minister likes numbers too. For him, it seems to me that numbers have magic. Now, the only thing about this, though, is that no matter how much they use numbers, they cannot somehow stay on the facts. And always they stray from the facts. It doesn't matter what numbers they use, they stray from the facts. After 3.5 years, we find that we have a government of conjurers, creating reality with a wave of the hand in thin air. Money spent, nothing to show. You can't see anything, but they tell you it's there. Retrenchment everywhere, but the unemployment figures not going up. Labor participation rate horrible, 59%, but everything is all right. 6,000 plus tertiary level graduates can't get jobs, but all is well. Negative investment in 2018, not me saying so. The Central Bank Monetary Report of November 2018. Negative investment for 2018, minus 441 million. But plenty confidence in the economy, according to the government. The local conglomerates in Trinidad and Tobago, they are investing in Colombia, they're investing in Jamaica, they're investing in the DR, they're investing in St. Martin, everywhere, except Trinidad and Tobago. But there is a lot of confidence in the economy. Decline in every non-energy sector. But we celebrate turnaround, turn the corner, growth in the energy sector, and they now, I'm reading that they're now going to correct the IMF and correct the economic outlook, global economic outlook. I wait to see. Decline in every non-energy sector. The economy has contracted, GDP has fallen, debt is escalating, but that is not bad, it is good.
Silence.
Because, why is it good? The contracting economy and everything else that is going on, because inflation is low. Nobody buying anything, nobody investing in anything. The place at a standstill, stagnation, they're boasting about 1% or so inflation. So, there have been confusion of numbers before. The Minister of Finance, as you know, chastised the Minister of Energy and members of the staff of the Ministry of Energy. I think it was in November. Well, okay, he pointed out that they made a mistake. He pointed out that they made a mistake, and he corrected them, and he sent from the Ministry of Finance his own numbers to the IMF. Of course, the IMF did not get its numbers in time, and therefore it had 0.9% projected growth. For 0.9% growth. But he had a different number, and this is the number now he wants to correct. Now, I notice the numbers now are coming from the Ministry of Finance. We don't hear about the CSO and the numbers again. We don't hear about the central bank numbers again.
Go ahead, do take your...
The Ministry of Energy, well, we know that their numbers are not correct anymore. From the, you mean from the, no, you mean from the review of the economy? Yes, of course you get it from there. You get it from there, and that was the last one that you did, which was last year, which came with the budget. But all the other numbers, all the new numbers, where are they coming from, Minister of Finance?
Address the chair. Address the chair.
Yes. Where are they coming from?
It's in their head.
Between 2017 and 2019, I want to ask the Minister of Finance, didn't oil production decrease by about 25%? Wouldn't that make a difference to the numbers? The Minister of Finance said that he collected more revenue than he expected in Q1 fiscal 2019. So Q1. Because he had better than expected gas prices. I think he said 11.3, was that correct? 11.3%, I think he collected against an estimate of 10 billion. The revenue forecast, as I said, for 20, well, I don't think I mentioned this number, but it's in his budget, is 47.7 billion. Now, for us to have the kind of growth rates that the Minister of Finance is talking about, we would have to have a revenue of about $12 billion a quarter from the oil and gas sector, because nothing else is growing. And therefore, I am questioning a lot of the things here. And I would like some straight answers for some of the issues that we need to raise here.
48.1, the members continuously referring to figures and events and statistics in fiscal 2019. At no time did I speak about the outturn for fiscal 2019. 48.1, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
All right, so again, member, if it is that you are quoting figures of 2019, please desist and let's remain with 2018, please.
No, if the member, no, yes, Deputy Speaker, I concur with your, I will try to respond to what you asked. We are dealing with 2018, it is true, but the minister is the Minister of Finance, and he makes statements, not in this House, yes, not in the debate. That is correct.
48.1, statements made by me outside of this House, not in this debate, are not relevant to this debate. I ask for a ruling on that.
That could not be true.
Again, members, we are debating 2018, right? I don't have the figures before me here, so I will ensure that each member will keep the debate with regards to 2018. So, member for Caroni Central, proceed, 2018.
Yes. And
Minister of Finance, I have ruled.
And Mr. Deputy Speaker, you know that I've been speaking just to 2018. The issue,
Silence.
the issue that I raised, just as the minister did not talk about the 5% and the repo rate here, but he went out and had a press conference the next day to talk about it. I don't think that on that basis I can be debarred, Mr. Deputy Speaker, from referring to what the Minister of Finance said. Mr. Minister of Finance, you know, all you just get licked down over the lack of transparency issue on this sandals matter, right?
48-1, Mr. Speaker. 48-1.
Member, please, on both sides. Members on both sides. Member, address the chair. Minister of Finance, please. Address the chair, and let's continue. And as I'm on my legs, your initial 30 minutes has expired. You have an additional 15. You care to avail yourself?
Yes, thank
Right,
you very
proceed.
much, sir. Okay, I won't be very much longer, you know, because the questions the fundamental questions I had to ask about the central bank overdraft, I have asked, and I hope to get some clear answers. I don't want to know it in January. Tell me for 2018. Tell me for 2018, Minister of Finance, I'm asking now, and tell me the quantum, all right? And the I know it fluctuates, I know it's a daily matter, but tell me, at the end of 2018, what was it? And so I can have an idea. Don't tell me 75% and so on, because it has been averaging between 80 and 90%, as you know, during the 2018 period. Okay, and you said it reached as high as 98, so we take you at your word for that. Now, this variation bill raises the issue of expenditure, okay? And without going into anything deep, I simply want to refer to one of the documents that we had, matters relating to 2018 accounts, which was circulated on Monday. And to point out that some of the areas that were reduced, you know, might have been pretty productive areas in terms of the development aspect of our country. And while I think it is important to meet the central bank overdraft interests, and I understand the Minister of Finance's need to do that, I also want to say that paying people for vehicles that the Ministry of National Security lease from them is important, and because they provide a service to the Ministry of National Security and the police service, and they should be paid so that they can continue their business. I think that the 211 million from the Ministry of Health, you say you do more with less, but I think people understand that there's something missing in the health service in this country. Whatever advances you may have made, whatever progress you may have made in certain areas, I think that there's a general feeling in the country that you don't get the best health care and you don't get the best service, and that these things require some attention. The money from the Ministry of Works, it was only a small amount relatively, 44 million, I think, if I'm not mistaken. But still, think of what happens, for instance, when you suppress an expenditure and the Minister of Works is dealing with a water course and he does not have the money to pay the contractor. Think of what happens when the Minister of Works is building a bridge and he doesn't have the cash flow to continue the bridge. What happens? It's not just the Minister of Works, not just the bridge, it's not just the water course. Think of the consequences for the community in which that work is being done. So it's not simply a question of suppression of cash flows to the Ministry of Works or any other ministry, Ministry of Health, Ministry of National Security, but what is the consequence for the large numbers of people who depend on it, from the person who are involved in contracts to the persons, the citizens who are getting the benefit of the work that the contractors do to make their quality of life better, whether it is to prevent flood from happening, whether it is to give them a bridge that has been broken, that they need to pass from one part of their community to the other, or whether it is something else. These are very important. So I think this suppression of expenditure issue in order to meet other needs is something that we have to look at with a little more sensitivity in, first of all, the governance process, and secondly, the development process. And the third thing is that in looking at the expenditure, you know, one of the things, for instance, that the Prime Minister, when he made his presentation that was later broadcast to the nation in two parts, one of the things that he did, which was useful and factual, was that he took the 2019 expenditure, which is the very same in terms of the structure of expenditure for the country as it would have
Mr.
been.
Deputy Speaker, Standing Order 48.1. He is discussing 2019.
Why don't you wait till I finish this sentence?
Members,
2019.
members,
For what?
members,
You apologize to the nation.
So there's so much repetition.
members, there is a certain decorum that is to be maintained in this chamber. All right? Each member has the right to stand up on a standing order. Okay? And we know how that operates. Member for Caroni Central. I really do not appreciate your response to the members standing up on a standing order. It's inappropriate. Please. And other members do not respond after. There's a decorum that goes with this job. So, member for Caroni Central, let's kindly retract the statement for the records that you would have stated and proceed. All right? And again, members, he started his comment. As the speaker, I will determine the extent of the referral or the reference that he's making on the particular point. So let's retract the statement and let's move on.
I retract fully, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I also apologize to you and to this House, because the point I was seeking to make is that the slide that the Prime Minister did was the structure of expenditure in 2019, which is exactly the structure of the expenditure in 2018 and 17 and so on. The structure of the expenditure has not changed in 2016 or 17 or 18. Okay, Mr. Deputy Speaker? And before I could finish my sentence, the member got up, which is why I responded. Yes. So,
Silence.
One of the things that I think that...
Nakurima, I need no assistance. I need no assistance. Proceed.
One of the points that I would like to make, I'm not quarreling with the government about it,
St. Joseph, please.
is that one of the issues that require attendance here in this, that becomes clear in the variation and as becomes clear, for instance, when the infrastructure fund is not used and deployed elsewhere, which is part of the public sector investment fund, which is a very important economic stimulus because it ties in with other private sector participation in the economy. One of the points I'd like to make is that over the last 3.5 years, the structure of expenditure has not changed. The government has indeed reduced expenditure, and I want to acknowledge that. I am not here to give any misinformation, but the pattern of expenditure has not changed at all, and therefore the pace of development has been extremely slow, almost to the point of non-existence. As I've indicated, Mr. Deputy Speaker, what we have is a almost contracted economy, with the only place of growth being in the natural gas sector and with decline in every other sector. I don't want to spend my time here using the numbers from the Central Bank report of November, in which when you look cumulatively at 2016, 2017, and going into 2018.
Deputy Speaker, 48.1, November is not in fiscal 2018. November is in fiscal 2019. The member is constantly referring to fiscal 2019.
Mr. Finance, identify the date, no comments has been made and no figures have been given. Proceed, overruled.
Yes. But what we see in that report is the continuing decline in every sector and the difficulty of initiating a recovery in this country. And the whole point of governance and government and economic management, and the reason I'm raising economic management, Mr. Deputy Speaker, is because the Minister of Finance was beating his chest and said how great the economic management was for the country and how well they had managed financially on less income and how much they have done in the country. But the numbers do not tell us that. And the numbers do not tell us anything close to what the Minister of Finance was articulating here at all. So we are in a situation where it has become clear the minister took time to try to repair a quarrel between himself and the Prime Minister on what in fact the numbers were and what in fact the revenue numbers were. I am not going to get into that. They can quarrel if they want about it. The facts are there in the public domain and people can know. Then the monetary policy report also makes it very clear that the central bank governor is trying very hard not to come into conflict with the fiscal policy of the Minister of Finance, but he has certainly different, more independent views and feels that something is skewed and that there is some policy confusion between fiscal policy and monetary policy in this country. And this misalignment of monetary and fiscal policy really finds its way in terms of the lack of investment, the lack of confidence, the loss of jobs, the closure of businesses, etc., and ultimately the contraction of the economy and the difficulty of initiating a recovery in a country in which the decline outside of the energy sector becomes steeper and steeper with each passing month. So I think that this bill today, the appropriation of this, what we are doing is a report, I think that this discussion that we are having here today on how the money has been altered and moved from one place where expenditure has been suppressed and accumulated in such a way as to pay off the overdraft at the central bank speaks to us not of good management of the economy, Madam Speaker. It really speaks to us of a situation in which the management of cash flows, which I concede has been a concern of the Minister of Finance, and the movement of money in order to meet the requirements for debt servicing in this particular case has become the dominant concern as the debt increases in Trinidad and Tobago. Because it's not only the central bank overdraft, which the IMF in their report has in fact warned about, but it's the way we are headed in terms of debt generally. And I know that the argument on the other side is that we do not have the finances in order to cause the development that is required, and therefore we must borrow. But even if you concede that, the question is that we are not having the development or the growth in any of the areas outside of energy. There is no action on the infrastructure front. There is no action on the international investment front. There is no action on the local investment front. There's no expansion of business. You don't see it. You don't see it in terms of the role of the Exim Bank for the manufacturing sector. And Madam Speaker, what I am saying is that the narrative that the Minister of Finance told in order to present these documents
Member
to
for
us.
Caroni Central,
Yes,
your time is now spent.
okay.
Yes?
That narrative is a
Your time is now
false
spent.
narrative.
Yeah.